Welcome to the first ever episode of Last Month's Games, a series where I play all the games I possibly can that come out in a calendar month and provide my feelings about them all at my wallet's expense. It's a decent month to kick off the year, so let's get into it. Blackwind is an action game, and it's also the worst game I have played so far this year. It was so bad I was only to stomach about 2 hours of it before I dropped it and demanded a refund. So fair warning, I did not finish this game. If you want an in-depth review for this game, I highly recommend checking out a formal review for it, although I will say this game is not really worth your time in any capacity, except for listening to me bitch about it in my video, of course. I mean, come on now, let's not get silly here. I saw trailers for this initially and it looked cool. The idea of running around as a mech cutting and shooting shit up in a classic beat 'em up arcadey fashion was promising, plus the setting and pretty explosions made it look like it would be a short fun experience. Boy was I wrong. This joins a small cabal of games that I call games that hurt my head to play, and I don't mean I find them boring or uneventful, I mean that they physically cause me pain, typically in the form of migraines. And that is because of two things this game does. Number one, the camera is the worst camera in video game history. The camera auto zooms in and out based on the area you are in. It has a mind of its own. You cannot control or adjust it in any fashion. The problem with that is that the automatic camera becomes disorienting and straight up mind scrambling because of the way it shifts visual proportions left and right. One moment it'll be really up close, completely sealing off your line of sight of what's ahead unless you move. Then it will zoom out to such an odd angle that objects and stuff just don't look right. And trying to make mental maps of the places you're in is a pure nightmare because things are not congruently scaled at all. It's like a version of Superliminal that's not trying to blow your mind, it's trying to blow your whole goddamn head off. It makes battling enemies even more of an arduously boring experience than it already is, which brings me to number two. The gameplay is mind-numbingly bland. Combat is super repetitive and super skeletal. You will end up mashing the same combos over and over, doing the same finishers over and over, fighting the same lifeless and uninspired enemy types over and over. The progression system was not very promising. The level design is super drab and heavily copy-pasted, especially the interiors, which look horrendous. And the platforming sections suck. The jump angles and momentum and positioning don't matter. They don't correlate well at all. It doesn't help when you have a camera that's this bad either. Bunch all of these components up together on top of a generic ass story where your scientist dad is lost on an alien planet after your ship gets shot down, and you, his bitch ass son, who nonstop bitches about his bitch ass dad, saying how much he misses him and where's my dad and I love my daddy, my superhero, are thrust into a mech suit and an AI companion on a mission to rescue him. The voice acting is not good. Listen to this real quick.
Those turrets look threatening. Wow! Energy blades! How cool is that? Oh my god! It's disgusting! So cool! Step up and kill me, if you can.
Dude, blow your nose. Did they not have tissues at the booth or something? This frail ass bitch not only never stops talking, but quickly goes from being a fearful figure who you're supposed to empathize with into a bloodthirsty psychopath in the matter of minutes. This type of gameplay narrative dissonance would make Naughty Dog proud. Overall, I thoroughly disliked my time with this game. I think it's awful. It's not worth your time or money. It really doesn't do anything right. My verdict, actively avoid it. It's been a while since I played a Serious Sam game. The last one I recall playing was Serious Sam 2 back when it was on Xbox, and I had fun with it, but there wasn't much for me to grab onto. I never fell in love with the series, and I have not kept up with it in the longest time. But in the post-Doom gaming landscape, I've been giving other shooters a shot, and I thought with Siberian Mayhem out, it'd be a good time to jump back in and see if the series had evolved since I last played it over 10 years ago. It hasn't, but I think this is what Serious Sam fans prefer. No fancy tricks, no new gimmicks, just good old shoot 'em up Serious Sam. At its core, it's a high high-octane action shooter with lots of enemies, and I do mean lots of enemies. There are levels where you are in these claustrophobically structured arenas with jump pads, nearly infinite ammo, and waves upon waves upon waves of enemy hordes. When you leave the tight spaces of a factory or a prison, there are these huge plains of open areas where you will fight hundreds, if not thousands of them. I know that prospect might sound exhausting and as if it would be incredibly monotonous and repetitive, but the way Siberian Mayhem is tuned and balanced, switching between your weapons and making sure you're constantly on the move is pretty exhilarating and makes these 1 versus 1000 encounters super tense and fulfilling. That feeling of locomotion you get as you're ripping through the blizzarding tundra, laying waste to everything you see with everything in your arsenal is so cool and addicting. The gunplay is pretty good, the feedback is responsive, the recoil and punch the guns is very meaty and powerful, and the arsenal you have is pretty diversified. The guns in the game all feel like they have a purpose to them. Obviously most people will find one gun to primarily use, but with how the ammo economy works and the numerous amounts of enemy types sprinkled throughout the level having their own weaknesses and damage thresholds, picking which weapons to use for damage, for crowd control, and for defense is pretty vital. It's very Doomish, so there's a lot of thrills to be had with the overall gameplay loop. I do wish the levels weren't so bloated. The downtime you get in between fights is minimal, and sometimes the game tries to mix things up with some pretty poor puzzles and optional objectives. Sure, some of these might lead you to a cool boss fight, but it's definitely not the most engaging side content. Also, some of these shooting gallery set pieces definitely try to do a bit too much, especially the ones with the boss turns that completely throw the pacing way out of whack for these firefights, where you have to wait for it to expose its weak spots. I get they were trying to spice up the ebb and flow of combat and give it some variety where you had to be more tactical and precise with your shots in some places after running and gunning so much, but this enemy design was not the best idea to follow through with. But in regards to gameplay, those are really the only complaints I have. So obviously it's not a looker, its story is poo-poo doo-doo. Whenever a cutscene played, I skipped it immediately because I did not care, and it isn't a technical marvel by any means because I had my fair share of performance issues, bugs, and game-breaking glitches. Overall, I had a lot of fun with it. I'm not in a position to rank it among the rest of the series since I'm not very familiar with most of the entries, but at $20 you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. My verdict, it's pretty good. Rainbow Six Extraction is essentially Ubisoft's hat in the ring of co-op zombie shooters, and that specific subgenre has been undergoing a drought with numerous titles falling flat on their face. This game is essentially discount GTFO. Extraction is built off of the same framework as Siege. Nearly everything has been copy-pasted into Extraction. Animations, operators, gunplay. It very much feels like a zombie expansion to Siege, which is why it baffles me as to why this is a standalone $40 game. Thankfully, it was on Game Pass, where it was accessible to more people, including your boy, and if it weren't for Game Pass, the player count for this game would have definitely been dramatically less than it was, because it is definitely not worth full price. Now, is Rainbow Six Extraction a bad game? No. Initially when I started playing, I was genuinely enjoying the game with a couple of friends of mine. The gunplay was smooth, the progression system felt fair and worth actually doing tasks and optional objectives for the XP. Each operator having their own strengths and weaknesses made experimenting with the class building enjoyable and tantamount to some of our runs. Since everything was new to us, we were coordinating a lot together. Who goes where, what weapons and tools were we taking, making sure we didn't make a lot of noise. The tactical aspect of the game works well in a few spots, and it's tuned decently enough to where you can't just run and gun your way through the later levels, otherwise you will get swarmed and die.
Holy fuck! These guys are trying to run a train on me! They are trying to run a train! Where the fuck are you guys?
The game's objectives were cool at first, some being clearing out these heavily infested nests, some where we had to kill a special type of enemy, horde defense, a singularity one that's like a mini boss fight. There's also this neat dynamic mission type where if you died in a previous level, you lose the operator you took on that mission. So the next one would be a rescue mission for that operator who has been captured by the aliens and turned into a giant cheetah. A couple of them were pretty bad, however, especially the defend the bomb missions where the sites were completely randomly generated, and sometimes they would spawn in the most impractical places ever. Defending two of these places at the same time just felt pointless and impossible. But for the most part, the gameplay overall just ended up being okay in the long run, and that's the perfect way to describe Rainbow Six Extraction. It's okay. The more I played it, the more the bland, risk-averse monotony settled in. The game just got stale after a while because you see what the game has to offer very quickly, and there's very little to begin with. The enemy variety is super plain, none of the characters nor the narrative have any personality, and the levels themselves are so unspectacular despite having 3 locales that would have produced some memorable maps. You have New York, San Francisco, and Alaska. The most they do with these marquee locations is just these tiny flat-floored areas with basic buildings of very little intrigue baked into them. Rather than running your way around the densely infested streets of New York with numerous back alley entrances and exits, you're just in a penthouse. And there are only 9 maps in total you can choose from that you have to play through over and over and over again. The overall experience for me just got dull after like 5 hours with the game. I was completely done with it after 2 days, and I forgot about it until I had to write the script for this video. I'm sure it has its diehards who still play the game, but player retention will be extremely difficult for this product. I just don't see much people sticking around for this, especially since Siege is still going strong and it's getting a new season. So when that comes out, this game's player base is going to be in free fall. I just don't know what Ubisoft was going for with this game. It's probably not going to sell well. It's not all that enticing of a product to begin with. And if you were still making content for Siege, what purpose does this game serve in the long run? It is March now. This video is well over a month late. It's on Game Pass where it can reach more people, and I still haven't seen a peep out of this game since it was released. It's a decent short-term experience to play around with your friends, but you'll most likely just move on to another title pretty shortly. My verdict: just play Rainbow Six Vegas 2. That shit is goated.
So dance while I put you in a trance. Come on, girl, I wanna rock you, baby. You can jump when the beat gets rough. They can wild with the feel.
Windjammers 2 at its core is just air hockey, but with frisbees, supers, and a slick, vibrant 80s art style, complemented with a cool soundtrack. Now, the first Windjammers came out in 1994, and I certainly was not around when it came out. I wasn't even a mere sperm cell, but I do remember playing Windjammers on some Neo Geo arcade machines when I was younger, and 4-year-old, 5-year-old me liked it a lot, but like most games in the arcade era, it faded into obscurity, lost to time forever, it seemed like. But nearly 30 years later, a sequel comes out, and it's a pure banger. Visually, it looks great. The game's art style is very bright and colorful. What really gives the game its charm to me is the fact that it's hand-drawn. There's so much life and personality in every bit of the characters, animations, and stages. The effects look great. The presentation overall just nails what it's trying to go for. The real style comes from the gameplay itself, which is pretty simplistic, but the mechanics themselves are quite robust and gives the game some pretty good depth both on offense and defense. There's sliding, timing, and releasing throws for max velocity, jumping to snatch discs out of the air as well as dunk them, pop-ups, super throws that are almost guaranteed goals if you aren't up to snuff defensively, and curving your throws, which is one of the coolest feelings in this game when you absolutely fool your opponent. There are so many angles and perspectives to throw a disc from, it's like curving a bullet in Wanted. The caveat is you don't move on offense in Windjammers, you play the disc where you catch it, so with this inherent limitation comes forth a variety of strategies you can employ. You can dunk throw, you can loft it up, you can bounce the disc off walls, you can also use certain stages and their ricochet points to make the game crazier than it already is. You never feel helpless when you're on offense or defense because your tool set has you ready for anything, and those matches where you get these non-stop back and forths that last like over a minute while you two are duking it out is such a great feeling. The characters all have their own specialties, whether it be speed or power, different supers which plays a big part of game plans and strategies, and pair that with each stage having their own gimmick and you have a gameplay loop that can sustain itself for a pretty long time. I gotta say the online was flawless as well and matchmaking was decently fast. I did not encounter a single bad match whatsoever in terms of lag. The netcode is fantastic and you can get a good amount of games in a short amount of time. In short, Windjammers 2 is super fun and it's also on Game Pass. Thank you, Papa Phil. This revival was a welcome surprise, and to be fair, I knew it would be a banger. From the moment it was announced, I had faith it was going to be a great game because the publishing studio was Dotemu, the people who not only ported classic SNK titles into the modern day, but who brought Streets of Rage back from the dead and gave it an awesome revival title with Streets of Rage 4. With their current hot streak and how well Windjammers 2 was received, it only makes me more hyped for their other 2 games slated to come out this year with Metal Slug Tactics and the TMNT beat 'em up game. Goddamn, my inner child is happy as hell. So yeah, my verdict, Windjammers 2 is awesome. Now, to preface my forthcoming opinion, I want it to be known. Number one, my capture card shitted and farted itself while I was recording footage, so I am using footage from other creators to fill the space. And number two, I'm not a big Pokemon guy. I don't know the names of most of the Pokemon I see on the internet. I have no idea what gen most of these Pokemon originate from. If you were to ask me what this specific Pokemon's evolution was, I would probably say it's a Jerry's Sub and Pizza Shop.
It's finger licking good!
The only connection I have to Pokemon is that I really like the old cartoon series, and that Pikachu is absolutely adorable.
No, look. He's just sleeping.
The reason I say this is because Arceus is pretty beloved by Pokemon fans, or at least from the Pokemon fans I see on the internet, who for years have had to suffer such low effort entries for nearly over a decade, most recently being Sword and Shield. Now granted, I haven't played any new Pokemon games, or at least any new mainline Pokemon games since high school like 10 years ago. The newest Pokemon games I've played have been Pokken and new Pokemon Snap, which are fucking awesome, but even from afar, it isn't hard to see just how complacent Pokemon as a series has gotten. Its stale gameplay formula and super outdated visuals finally got some pushback after years of this stuff. When you see how Zelda and Mario continuously innovate and reinvent themselves over time, it's pretty easy to get mad at Game Freak for how they constantly do the bare minimum, especially considering how much money Pokemon makes. If you look at Pokemon's contemporaries from their early days to how they have evolved now, there's no excuse for this franchise to be so antiquated. It needed a shakeup for sure, and Arceus definitely is a refreshing game, relatively. It's Pokemon but open world, which has become quite the go-to method for reinventing a series, and to say it doesn't do wonders for the few who try it would be an understatement. So, does Pokemon Arceus have a place in this? No. From the 10 to 12 hours I played of Arceus, which I know is not very much for this game, so you can definitely take my opinion with a grain of salt, it's a decent game, so I'll get the obvious negatives out of the way first. The opening hours are brutal. The moment you materialize in this void and get a cell phone personally handcrafted by God, you are met with so much bloated and overextended and unnecessary dialogue for the next few hours. The game just refuses to ease you into it. For every 5 minutes you get to actually play the game, you are bombarded with non-stop obstructionary, dead-sounding static cutscenes for the next 15. I get it's supposed to be a tutorial, but it's so poorly paced and structured. I was so bored and getting so annoyed at how many times they pull back the reins when you got a bit of freedom. The visuals are ass, no which way around it. It's utterly hideous to look at. I am a firm believer of gameplay over graphics, okay? Some of my favorite games aren't exactly flattering in the visual department, and they have not and will not age well. But Arceus is just painful to look at sometimes, because there are so many clashing elements of its art direction that's so noticeably off. The shading on the characters looks so unfinished, there's barely any good texture work, the lighting is subpar, there is so little density and flourish to the open world, the technical art aspect is severely lacking, and it results, in my opinion, the most lifeless and unremarkable open world I have ever played in a game. I never once got that feeling of seeing something in the distance and being like, ooh, what's over there? I get that making a game on the Switch means you have to make concessions with visuals, but there are games on the Switch that don't make nearly as much money as Pokemon that look significantly better because they have actual art direction. This is a mess. The Pokemon themselves look fine, although they barely animate and they barely make any noise. Speaking of noise, this game has barely any notable audio, barely any cues, no sonic ambience, the soundtrack is okay. The Pokemon don't make very distinct noises, although for me it was jarring not to hear them say their names when they do stuff, but considering the early Civilization setting and the fact that I am very used to the animated series and Smash iterations where they do say their names, I guess that's on me. But even then, the game being nearly devoid of meaningful audio also contributes to just how hollow the open world is. So with the negatives out of the way, I think at the core of it, there is an enjoyable gameplay loop to be had. I think going around and capturing Pokemon in real time is fun. The battle system felt more the same mechanically, but I like the more organic encounters as opposed to random trainers just jumping you. Despite how very little gameplay elements are integrated into the open world, what the most you can do with it is, simply hide in the short grass and sneak around. That feeling of seeing new Pokemon in new areas felt rewarding in a way. I do wish they were in more lively ecosystems to help personify how they live and interact with one another. I know this is the upteenth time I've referred to it, but Jesus, the open world sucks. Progressing and leveling up your Pokemon actually incentivized me to do their specific upgrade tasks, so I ended up putting some actual time into diversifying which Pokemon I would have on me for a certain area and which ones to evolve and all that jazz. Aside from that, the other elements were okay. The crafting is serviceable. Getting a magical horse to ride around made traversal less time consuming. Yeah, I mean, in totality, it's just decent to me. I still think Pokemon fans are getting shafted despite the changes to the classic formula. It's still not drastic enough for me to say that this is really a turning point for the franchise. Is it a step in the right direction? Sure, but mainline Pokemon still has a lot of work to do for it to really innovate again. But that's just my perspective. A lot of fans really adore this game, and I'm happy to see so many people enjoying themselves as if they were kids again. Hopefully Game Freak takes close notice of the reception and continue to try new things for the future. Either that or Nintendo gets Atlas to make a Pokemon game, which would be rad. I prefer this route, but it will never happen. My verdict: if you like Pokemon, then you already bought it and you don't care what I have to say about it. Nobody Saves the World is a game most people did not see coming. It barely got any marketing to my knowledge, and I didn't even know about the game until one day before its release. I saw snippets of this game online, and I thought it looked cool. The art style was very appealing, and the dungeon crawler gameplay looked like a good time. Then I saw the people making it were Drinkbox Studios, and I quickly decided that I had to play this game as soon as possible. Now, if you don't know who Drinkbox Studios are, they are the masterminds behind Guacamelee 1 and 2, the latter being a game I revere as one of the greatest Metroidvanias ever made. Seriously, if you have not played them yet, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. In Nobody Saves the World, you start as one of the chorus kids from Rhythmic Heaven who nabs a wand from the world's dumbest wizard, which grants you the ability to shapeshift. You can then transform into various classes that have their own abilities and utilities. The rat, for example, can fit in small spaces and deals poison damage while also recovering its health. The knight has sharp damage and gets a damage buff whenever he has low health, and other effects for other classes include bleed damage and light and electricity and so on and so forth. You then escape out of the dungeon and venture into the open world, taking quests and exploring settlements and dungeons alike. In its first couple of hours, it really takes its time to lay down the groundwork. The game introduces you to its mythic medieval world, the signature Drinkbox art style, over-the-top characters, juvenile humor, and it slowly eases you into the gameplay systems. And during this time frame, I thought it was enjoyable. The combat was simple but satisfying, exploration was decent. I also love the progression system and how it works in this game. The way to level up is character specific, where you complete tasks that revolve around killing enemies with certain abilities. I thought this was a great way to incentivize switching between playstyles often, as opposed to just sticking it out with one class, and it never felt grindy. But with Drinkbox's repertoire for making incredibly fun games, I will admit when I started playing it, I wasn't feeling it. I didn't dislike its initial hours by any means, but I felt like I was going through the motions because everything I was doing was pretty conventional. Go here, do a quest, kill some shit, come back, level up, rinse and repeat. There were some funny encounters I had, like this horse that wants you to mate with it telepathically, or this NPC that spews the classic Navy SEAL copy pasta, but that pizzazz that immediately jumped out at me when I started both Guacamelees wasn't there, and I was a bit worried about how this game would sustain itself over 15 to 20 hours with such a basic gameplay loop. But then, after a couple of hours, the game finally gave me a taste of that secret sauce that I wanted all along, and that's when everything clicked. The moment the game introduces the mechanic where you can mix and match status effects and abilities on any class you want at any time you want, the gameplay possibilities became near endless. I can make my petite archer ram into hordes of enemies, I can incubate my knight to recover health, and I can shoot fucking arrows with my horse. And the best part is that this is not for novelty. Later in the game, dungeons will overrun you with status coded enemies and bosses that are only susceptible to certain effects like shock and light and so on and so forth. So going in with a class's base kit is a recipe for disaster. Every dungeon is designed to make you experiment with the game's many classes. Like, I am not joking. The class tree is humongous with so many to unlock and prestige. I reached a point where I was unlocking them like crazy because of how often I was switching between classes and leveling them up. It was like more classes, more classes, more classes. The freedom and flexibility Nobody Saves the World offers is liberating. There are so many well-designed spaces where almost any build you make is viable, and if it isn't viable in one space, it definitely definitely works in another. I was non-stop theory crafting builds, and that is a sensation I adore when it comes to video games. If you can think it, you can do it. And as a result, everything else the game had to offer in the form of side content grew so much more interesting and exciting. By the time I finished the game, which was about 15 hours or so, I looked back at my overall experience, and outside of the relatively mundane opening hours, I had no complaints with it. I love this game. Drinkbox delivers yet again. It is a strong contender for my Game of the Year spot so far, and it's on Game Pass. Thanks again, Papa Phil. My verdict? It's fucking incredible. In conclusion, it was a solid start for the year. Besides Blackwind, the games I played were all enjoyable at the least. Rainbow Six Extraction, despite how dull it got incrementally, provided a decent time with my friends. Serious Sam's Siberian Mayhem was fun. The only blockbuster title this month was Pokemon, which obviously got the most attention in the gaming sphere. I'm not head over heels for it, but it's nice to hear positive buzz about Pokemon again. For me, however, the smaller under the radar titles are the one that stole the show for me personally. Between Nobody Saves the World and Windjammers 2, these two games focused and honed on their core gameplay to near perfection, all without a typical AAA budget, and were easily the strongest games of the month to me. Side note, I apologize that this video is extremely late. I am feverishly working on February's currently, which should be out by the end of the month, but with the annual video game summer drought, I should catch up by July. Just as a reminder, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe as well. I also make videos about music if you're interested. Thank you for watching, and my game of the month goes to